Hello, everyone, and good time of day to you. My name is Jason Hand, and I'll be guest co-hosting this week's Contributing Today meetup. A little about myself. I'm a cloud advocate over at Microsoft, where I'm working on a Learn TV platform, and I get the honor to be on a daily show called the Hello World Show. I also get to host a podcast on developer relations, talking about all kinds of things DevRel, a show called The Community Pulse. And last but not least, I get to enjoy a fair amount of time working with communities such like this today, talking about subjects of site reliability engineering. And I'm really happy to be here with all of you today.
Awesome. Hey, and I'm co-hosting. My name is Carrie Liebenberg. I'm a cloud native engineer at Container Solutions. We are a consultancy and we focus on the cloud native transformation journey of companies. Work a lot with open source tools. My skills include the DevOps buzzwords, CI/CD, automated infrastructure, configuration as code, containers, Kubernetes, but alas, not SRE. So this is still new territory for me. I'm really excited to join tonight and learn more about SRE. My skills to this evening will be to ask questions. Thank you.
Awesome, Carrie, and it's great to work with you today. So super excited for our show. And for those of you who aren't familiar, Contributing Today is a mostly weekly show covering different open source topics each week. And whether you're a regular or maybe you're just here to talk about and learn about site reliability engineering, either way, welcome. And we'd love for you to share what you're seeing and hearing with others on social media using the hashtag Contributing.Today. So make sure you share that. We'd love to get more people involved and hear from all of you. So yeah.
Join us in the chat, either on Discord or the embedded chat right on the right of the screen. And spoiler, it's the same thing, Discord or the chat. Go ahead and chat with us.
Yep. And when you do, also, please be mindful of our code of conduct. You can review those terms over at contributing.today/code-of-conduct.
And you can find past recordings of the meetups, like on Python, Go, writing docs, funding, and sponsoring via the contributing.today/past-sessions.
Awesome. Well, I say maybe we get started, Carrie. What do you think?
Sounds great.
All right. So today we're going to be doing a bit of a panel, kind of a free flow discussion with folks from the SRE world. And we hope that you can join us in the chat and the conversation like Carrie mentioned.
Yeah. And
go ahead, Carrie.
You totally go ahead. I was going to say, yeah, so I mean, the SRE stuff, there's a lot of acronyms, SLIs, SLOs, SLAs. I'd love to learn more about these.
Yeah, so let's bring in some of our guests and see if we can start to wrap our head around what some of these acronyms mean. All right, welcome everybody. Let's go around the horn and do some introductions here. First of all, we've got Sima Aronson. Sima is a developer and self-proclaimed site reliability nut, currently working as the head of developer relations at K6.io, and is a proud 1X engineer. Welcome, Sima.
Thanks. Great to be here.
And we've also got who else we got here? We've got Sven. Sven, I'm going to take a stab at your name, Sven Molenka. And he's a site reliability engineer over at Albert Heijn, and Bart Reinders is also with us. He's a site reliability engineer also or at Alhad Delhaize. I'm not sure if I get that right or not, but they happen to be working on the same team. So welcome, both of you.
Yeah.
Great to be here. Thanks.
Okay, let's maybe start with Simi. Simi, you're also a maintainer of the Watchtower and the Shouter project, right?
Yeah, that's true.
You want to tell us a little bit about what those projects are and how much time it's taken, really maintaining those?
Sure. So Watchtower, I guess some of you might have heard of it before. It's a Docker image, basically, that is used to automate Docker container image updates. So you basically deploy it to your Docker instance, and it will automatically make sure you run the latest version of whatever image you're running. And Shouter is a notification library for Go, kind of like AppRise, if any of you have tried that, for Python, but it's written in Go, and it's mainly written to be used with Watchtower, but we've seen it being used in different Kubernetes projects as well. So it's really fun to work on those two. it takes a lot more time than you would imagine to actually maintain them. We are like 2 or 3 that regularly contribute to the projects, but given that we have about a couple of tens of thousands of downloads every month, we really can't keep up. So if any of you would like to get started helping out in open source, feel free to join up in the projects. We're always welcoming more hands.
Great. Well, welcome, and thank you for being here. We're looking forward to hearing all your expertise, and also, help us answer some of the questions we might have from our community.
Thanks.
Awesome. Sven and Bart, what is Albert Heijn?
That's a great question. So Albert Heijn is the largest grocery store in the Netherlands. So I think we're also the oldest grocery store in the Netherlands. It started in a little shop in Zaandam by just one guy, Mr. Albert Heijn, and he basically grew this to the largest store in the Netherlands, and then it basically evolved into what is now known as Ahold Delhaize, which is Ahold was basically the large holding company under which Albert Heijn eventually grew, and it started to diversify its portfolio with like the apothecaries and pharmacies, and some sort of mergers and acquisitions happened, and basically now, so we're part of Albert Heijn, which is part of Ahold Delhaize, which is now basically a global company with many different brands in many different countries.
Awesome. That sounds amazing and huge. And in terms of what you do with all of that, what parts does your team work with?
So we're specifically from customer technology within Albert Heijn. So that's all of the interfacing with the customer itself. So you have the website, the app, but we also do like home delivery systems. So the warehouse management systems and things like that. So it's really everywhere where you touch the customer technology-wise, we are involved.
That's awesome. Yeah, I use the app so for the delivering, and it's really great. So, but what open source projects are part of your stack?
That's more difficult to say what isn't part of the stack. Within customer technology, we have like this open source first philosophy, whereby we choose open source projects over everything else unless we have a very good reason to not do it. And when we have struggles with open source stuff that might be too complex for all of us to handle, we first look at, well, are there any, usually these open source projects have some sort of corporations that are aligned with them from which you can get some support, you can take it as a service. So then we also try to look at those companies first before we start looking into like closed source solutions. So I think Sven has something about our monitoring stack that's basically completely open source.
So,
that we can share.
but I think I will show it later on. So actually, the whole road from where a developer deploys an SLO to scraping the data to visualizing it, everything is open source. So I think I will talk about that in a little bit.
Yeah, that's the monitoring stack, and then our entire infrastructure stack is also open source. We run Kubernetes, we run Spring Boot with Java, and we're running Apache. Like everything is managed with infrastructure as code. It's just the whole stack is basically open source. There's very small closed source components in there.
Oh, that sounds great. And then, so this monitoring stack that you spoke about that you've created, is that open source? Is that available? Can we go try it out?
Well, mainly it's just open source components, which are stitched together into a whole. So,
is there anything that has been open sourced from Albert Heijn's side? Like Albert Heijn code created?
We have a link. We have a little labs. So I think just recently we got onto GitHub. So we are now really looking into thinking, okay, what kind of cool things do we have behind the scenes that we can start moving towards the open source stack, right? So we have some internal Helm charts, for example, that we're using with Helm for all of our internal applications. Well, some of those things are very much focused on the Java stack. Can we perhaps open source those kinds of things so that other people can more easily get a Java stack on Kubernetes? There's a couple of things there that we do for our debugging that we've put on there so that other people can also, whenever they're building stuff, they can use the tools that we have. And the idea is that we grow this into a larger offering of everything that we're building internally.
Yeah, I've got a
Awesome.
question for both of you, or either of you really, for Sven and Bart. When it comes to these open source projects, this is actually one of our questions from our audience, I believe, who's wanting to know, when you go through evaluating open source projects and what you're going to introduce into your stack, a lot of times you want to make sure that there's a vendor or some sort of large community that's behind that's really providing some sort of support. Are there other things that you look for when you're evaluating some of the things that end up making into your, really part of your core business logic?
Well, I think firstly, of course, like you said, we evaluate the possible support, but also is there knowledge already within the organization to support it internally? Do we test it out? Does it work in our environment at all? So there will be a lot of proof of concepts constantly within our company. And I think that really helps. So to really test things out, do they work? Because you can see, you can see and talk about things, but unless you really implement it and really try it out, you don't even know if it really works for you. So.
It generally goes through these stages, same as you have like these stages within the CNCF, right? Where you have this sandbox, and then you have the incubating and sort of the graduated. That's sort of the way that it flows internally with us as well, where someone picks up on this, hey, I got this link right here, this new open source project. It does address some pain points we had before, and then someone will like take it on a Hack Friday. They will just try to hack something together, maybe have a little demo internally, show, hey, this is how it's going, this is the support that we're seeing, this is the community involvement, and then we sort of take it from there, and sort of as we use it and we see sort of how it's we look at the quality, we look at well, like you said, community support. We slowly start to roll it out and more things within our stack. So it's sort of like a roadmap towards graduation internally.
That makes total sense. And actually a follow-up question to that, I'm guessing that the two of you are a part of larger teams, and those teams are probably part of other larger teams. And it sounds like there's quite a bit of open source tooling that's introduced throughout. How do you surface not just what those tools are, but who the folks are that are maybe have some experience in it, or have some kind of knowledge that they're bringing? You were saying that we want to make sure that there are people in our team that have some sort of background experience with it. How do you surface that? How do you begin that conversation?
So I think mainly we were like one group, like one support team, but we split it up really in focus groups. So we now have a focus group that is a team that's specifically on observability. So it will really focus on all the tooling that's involved with that. And we have, so I'm part of the observability team, and Bart is part of the platform team. So you really get focus teams which can, quickly evolve through those toolings.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, and then we cross-pollinate by having like these little meetings where we come together and we discuss things. And within our larger organizations, we've sort of also adopted the sort of the Spotify model, where you have these guilds and these chapters where, for example, all of our front-end engineers, they have this chapter where they meet up and they discuss cool new technology, and they use Node and they use TypeScript a lot to sort of build all of their stuff. So they're lots of talk about that. They recently introduced some sort of Nginx proxies that they're using. So they focus on that stuff, and then they have these chapters. Backend has these chapters. We have our own chapters. That's where the cross-pollination really comes alive.
Love it. Awesome. Well, let's hear from Sima a little bit. He's been sitting off in the corner quietly, just listening in. Now, Sima, I know you've got some demos that we're going to get to eventually, but let's kind of pause and actually take a few steps back, because in the intro, Carrie had mentioned SLOs, SLIs, all that type of thing. Maybe you can help expand on what those acronyms mean for us in the audience. And also maybe, things that are happening within your projects around those topics.
Yeah, definitely. So SLIs, SLO, SLAs, it's all these acronyms. It's really hard to keep track of, and it's almost like the IaaS, PaaS, etc., that we had to learn for cloud a couple of years ago. So SLIs, or service level indicators, they basically tell us, or they are what we are observing, or the metrics that we are gathering. So for instance, we could say that we want to know what the HTTP request duration would be for a certain API that we're hosting, and then we track that information, and that becomes the service level indicator. And once we have that information, we probably want to put some kind of what should we call it? Some kind of threshold for what we deem to be acceptable, right? So, for instance, we say that 90%, or 90% is really low, I guess, compared to what most are doing today. But let's say 99.9% then should be, of all requests, should be responding within 200 milliseconds, let's say. You'll then formulate or create a service level objective that states that exact thing, right? So what is the acceptable condition for that service? In this case, 99.9% of all requests should be answered within 200 milliseconds. And service level agreements, they basically wrap these things up into some kind of commercial agreement often, or could be an internal as well, where you say, for instance, that if this service level objective that we've set up for this system or service is not fulfilled, then there usually some kind of economic compensation or whatever that falls out to the customer that is using your service.
Yeah.
So
I always think of it as like, what's the penalty? What are the repercussions if we, and like you said, it could be internally, maybe an incident response team or SRE team, or whoever might be looking at your monitoring and responding. They probably have some sort of internal agreement on what are the expectations, that it's going to take us 5 minutes to acknowledge a pager alert and to actually get in and start doing stuff. So thank you for those awesome clarifications. Now, I don't know if now's a good time, Sima, if you wanted to start showing off a little bit of your demo with your XK6 chaos stuff. Does that sound interesting?
Yeah, sure. Let's go ahead. I'll go ahead and share my screen.
And I guess too, as we're getting to Sima's screen, to pull that up here in a moment, it might be interesting or worthwhile to talk a little about chaos, just because if we're going to be showing off a tool here that's focused about that. And I happen to be looking further ahead. I know next week's episode or next week's meetup is specifically about chaos engineering. I'm curious if the others on here, Sven and Bart, do you do any kind of chaos engineering or any kind of fault injection, that type of stuff over at your org?
Intentional faults or
Intentional faults.
Not just like not just letting a new person have root access. I'm talking something that's a little bit more planned out.
I don't think we have anything running right now that's injecting faults directly. I know that we are running just regular tests in our acceptance environment where people simulate faults. But there's not something that we're running in production that simulates these kind of faults. But that's definitely something that we want to move towards. It really, I think, shows whether or not you are in a very stable or when you have a reliable environment, is if you can inject faults and actually detect that they're faulty or even recover from faults.
Right. Yeah, it's a good point. It helps you really understand your blind spots and your gaps, not only in your stack, but also in your monitoring. If you're expecting you're expecting SLIs to, hit some kind of level and you're breaking your SLOs and they don't, seems like we need to maybe investigate that. Same goes for your folks that are responding to alerts. If they're not even aware anything's wrong due to these fault injections and different things happening, then that's also, something that needs to be addressed. So it's lovely to see so many organizations starting to adopt and embrace these ideas around intentionally creating problems, not necessarily always in production. Although that's, I think a lot of people would argue that really is the only chaos experiments that count, is what's happening in production. But yeah, looking forward to hearing more from next week. I think we'll talk on this show about chaos experiments. But Semi, why don't you take it away and show us what you got?
Yeah, sure. So when I started out in tech about 12 years ago, I started out as an operations engineer, right? So at that point, we managed a lot of physical infrastructure as well as some virtual machines and things like that. And one of the things that I really hated about that was having to be on call and getting up in the middle of the night and, rebooting the cooling in the data center or whatever. So when we started to migrate all of these, when containerization and virtualization and the cloud became a thing, it really resonated with me that we'd be able to, run experiments or inject failure into our system in a controlled fashion while we were actually at work and not in the middle of the night when we were sleeping, right? So I really think that chaos engineering really helps us create great environments where we have confidence in our things being able to run without having to respond to a lot of on-call and things like that, or on-call incidents. So I work at K6, and we do mainly load testing products, but we also do a lot of extensions around that, or different plugins and things like that you could use to do reliability testing in general. And one extension that I've been working on is the XK6 Chaos extension. And let's have a look at the actual script that I prepared. So K6 lets you create performance tests or reliability tests in JavaScript. You'll be able to define pass-fail thresholds just as you would in any CI test. And you'll be able to simulate load against a server, and at the same time with XK6 Chaos, you'll be able to introduce fault or inject fault into your system while doing this. So in this demo that I prepared, we're going to run one experiment that will run 10 virtual users against a web server that I've prepared in Kubernetes for 20 seconds. And once 10 seconds has elapsed, we'll go ahead and kill one of the pods that are part of this replica set. So 20-second test, halfway in, we'll kill off a pod. Throughout the whole test, we'll be sampling this URL endpoint to see whether we get any request failures or whether everything will be available throughout the test. I won't go into detail about what all the code does, because then that would be a whole meetup. So this is basically the code. So with 47 lines, I'm able to probe the URL, set up my scenarios, check for a pod that is prefixed with the word chaos, and then kill off one of them. And at the same time, probe and make sure that I still get responses, right? So let's go ahead and run this. And one thing I really like about this, and that I like about all the chaos engineering tools that have emerged in the last couple of years, is that it doesn't require that much upfront investment, right? So a couple of years ago, when chaos engineering really started to become a thing, you actually had to first learn Vagrant to be able to deploy Chaos Monkey into your environment, and it was a really huge, bump to get over to be able to actually do any experiment. But with the XK6 Chaos, Chaos Toolkit, or Litmus Chaos and projects like that, you can really get started in just under an hour and do some really interesting tests that will provide you real value. So we ran our test. It counted the pods, told us that there were 34 pods in the default namespace. That is an error on me. I didn't update the namespace prior to the test. But we then killed off one of the pods, and we can then see that there are now 33 pods in the default namespace. Meanwhile, we continued to do probes against the web server, and we can see that we, throughout the test, did 57,000, almost 58,000 HTTP requests against this web server, and that only 0.10% of them failed, while the rest of them were successful. So yeah, that was a short demo. That was basically all I wanted to show. So if you think this is interesting, if you would like to contribute to this or help me in any way or come with feedback, feel free to hit me up on GitHub or Twitter, and I'll definitely onboard you into the project.
Excellent. And just off the top of my head, Tim, I love this. I love seeing more and more scripts like this, and people taking initiative to figure out how to poke holes in your infrastructure and your applications and just understand more about what's really happening. We think we know what's going on with our code and what's happening in our systems, and we have no idea. We just have no idea. But the one question always comes up for me when I see people start to dip their toe into chaos experiments and understand more about the reality of our systems is, what are you doing afterwards? Like if I was to take your script here and take your chaos tooling and implement that and start injecting failure, I want to make sure that I'm learning from whatever took place. What ideas do you have around what happens after these experiments are over?
I think this is a bit of a multi-part question, right? So one thing that I would recommend for most, really, not just those that want to do chaos engineering, is to get some kind of instrumentation in place in your applications. For instance, being able to do distributed tracing across your system while you do these kind of experiments is really helpful. You'll be able to see what happened, where you need to put in extra measures to make sure that your systems are reliable. For instance, in this case, we just kill off a pod probably mid-request without any grace period to really simulate a power out scenario. And in that case, you probably want to know where the request was when it ended, right? When we killed the server. So if we had that in place, we'd be able to track the whole end-to-end, let's say, journey of that request, and we'd be able to pinpoint exactly where we need to put these measures. For instance, maybe we could do we could add some retry logic to the service layer that is in front of these web servers to make sure that it picks another service at random whenever anything goes down. Or we could add some kind of circuit breaks that will, respond with some kind of acceptable but not really what we were looking for content. So those are all things you can do, but it really depends on your infrastructure and what it is that you are maintaining or what you are managing. But definitely adding tracing, so you'll be able to inspect whatever is going on in the application and then use that as a tool to kind of get a sense of what should be your next step.
Excellent. Yeah, I like that. And Sven, Bart, what are your thoughts on this type of stuff? Do you do any anything in the realm of chaos engineering or intentional chaos to really understand your systems and learn from that?
Well, something like this is really cool because this is something that you can do. This is very lightweight and can be done at any part during your integration. So whenever the developers are doing their integration testing, they can just add this as part of the whole stream. And I think one of the things that's also cool is you can connect this to your SLIs and your SLOs by saying, okay, let's say we're killing these pods. Let's say an entire rack in my data center goes down. What effect does that actually have on my SLO? You asked, what are the learnings? Maybe the learning when you look at your SLO is I can lose an entire rack, and really I meet my SLOs no problem. So I don't actually have to do anything to protect myself against this kind of outage. You sort of learn from your if you know what your SLO is and you know what your reliability objective is, and you have tools like this, you can make those decisions like, hey, I don't actually need to take action because I know I'm reliable enough. You also know that, let's say that you're actually testing your application live while this is running, you can actually see like, hey, my SLO is not going down, but my application is completely unusable. I know that now whatever monitoring I'm doing or whatever SLO that I made, whatever SLI I made, doesn't make any sense because it's not actually measuring sort of the end user impact.
Interesting. Okay. Sven, you got anything to add to that?
No, not really.
Okay. Well,
I have
and
a
I actually
quick question to
yeah,
sneak
go ahead,
in
Carrie.
there, if I may. Where would you, this chaos engineering, where would you build it in? Is it something that you put in your continuous integration, or deployment? Like, when is the best practice for doing the chaos engineering? And is it something you would automate and you wouldn't necessarily want to do manually all the time?
Well,
I think, yeah.
sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I always recommend putting everything in the CI, right? As long as it's possible to do within a reasonable timeline, make sure to automate it, because it's fun to do once, it's fun to do twice, but you quickly grow tired of it and just forget to do it or do it sloppy or whatever. So automate it and have it run on every commit basically, or every release that you do, to make sure that you always know that you're not drifting away in terms of reliability. Definitely.
Yeah, you know, the term chaos engineering. I feel like we're like in next week's episode talking about chaos engineering so much, but the term itself, you know, originated from a lot of the engineering efforts happening over at Netflix, and they for sure have some things in place that when you introduce a new app or new service, eventually it does have to go through, you know, obviously all the CI/CD stuff, but it has to include all of the checks, all of the quality, all the security, and it has to be part of the chaos monkey or the simian army, as they say, experiments. And you can get away with that for a little while, but eventually, if this is going to be a core production system or service or whatever, it does have to include some thought around fault injection and that kind of thing. Great question, Carrie. I'm curious, actually, Carrie, because at the beginning of the show, you mentioned that you've been around this space for a while in the DevOps world and engineering. And I know a lot of people, when they start first hearing about site reliability engineering, they're like, well, that's just what we do. I mean, that's like DevOps, you know, we're just putting a little more focus on monitoring and alerting and incident response and postmortems and chaos engineering. But I'm curious where your mind is at. Is any of this, are you realizing that these are things that we do, or are these new ideas?
Yeah, no, this is really great. I am learning a lot, especially context-based and like real world. My DevOps experience actually started because we were using DevOps with on-prem environments. So we were trying to automate what we were doing on-prem, and my cloud journey is still fairly new. And so that's kind of, I think, why there's this disconnect between how I see DevOps and this SRE knowledge that has still to be imparted on me. So hopefully, I've got the books. I will read them one day.
One of the things, so I used to work at a company called VictorOps, which was kind of the other PagerDuty out there. And we would do game days pretty often, at least, I don't know, once a month or so internally, where we were doing chaos experiments, controlled experiments. And a lot of it was intended to bring in people who weren't really part of what we would call operations teams and the monitoring and the front end developers, the mobile developers, our quality team. They were intended to be part of those game days for the sole purpose of just sharing more information about the reality of our systems and how they work, including the people parts, because we wanted to make sure, obviously, VictorOps is a paging and alerting tool. We wanted to make sure that the tool is working correctly, and that if something is going wrong, an SLO is being broken, that's really more around our mobile experience, that our mobile developers are being paged, and that they're the ones who are first to the scene. To put things in context of being a firefighter, you don't really know what's wrong unless you're in the fight, or not, shouldn't say what's wrong, but you don't know how bad it could be for other people if you're just the developers who write code and never really have to deal with things when they break. So sometimes there's these conversations about the distinctions between a DevOps team and an SRE team. And in my world, where I came from, it's all DevOps and it's all SRE, and it's all just one big mindset that we all think about. So yeah, I love that. These are definitely new concepts that many folks are hearing about. But my advice is to not necessarily think of it as a role for an SRE. Site reliability engineering is the responsibility of all engineers. It's just something we have to think about, just like security. And I know, Carrie, I think you had a question that you were going to raise from our audience around security, actually.
Yeah, good point. So there was a question. Any security integration or emphasis on the open source projects you work on? So this is for anyone there. And then the question is around ensuring open source projects maintain their high level of security as they always have. So if either Sven, Sime, or Bart, if you have advice on security for open source projects?
Maybe Bart, because I personally not a lot of experience with that.
I'm just reading the question.
I can go ahead and add some thoughts. Meanwhile, I think a lot have happened in the last couple of years in this space, and it's really great to see things like being able to do code QL or have Dependabot actually scanning your repos automatically and providing you with a lot of the security knowledge or security insight that you previously had to do manually to make sure there were no 0 days, I shouldn't say, but no actual exploits that were added to your project due to you not updating or things like that. So that really makes the job a lot easier. However, I still think it really makes sense to have a strong vetting process or a strong review process where you have multiple people reviewing whatever pull requests you get in and really trying them out and making sure they understand what you're getting in. Although that's not really a recipe to not be struck by security issues either. I'm thinking specifically about the Node event stream. Was that the name of the package a couple of years ago that was basically infiltrated by a trustworthy contributor and then turned out to be just some malicious black hat that wanted to overtake the whole project once they actually got maintainer status of it.
I think
So
that's
it's hard.
especially dangerous when you have open source projects that have like these dependencies upon dependencies upon dependencies, right? When you have this whole tree, and you go, if someone affects it somewhere in the middle, everything that's downstream sort of gets affected by that. Node, I think, would be particularly susceptible for that.
Is there a point where, for any of you, that if I make assumptions here, that you have a security team or someone on your team who is a little more focused on those aspects? Did they do some I don't know, some sort of reviewing of these projects as you make the case that they need to be part of your stack?
Yeah, we have actually dedicated security people with us. So we have on the Owl.io site, we have a global security office, which really deals with security on a corporate IT level. And then they have experts that come into every single department. So our department is one of them, where they assist us and they assist the teams with whatever security-related questions might come up. So that includes also sitting down with developer teams, talking about what they're integrating into their services, what they are building, what kind of threats, how they need to do threat modeling. But they also come to us and discuss how do we protect our systems? How do we choose which stuff we want to integrate with or which stuff we do not want to integrate with? So yeah, we have an actual dedicated set of people there to assist us with that.
Excellent. Well, listen, I know both of you also have a demo that we were going to try to get to today. So I don't know if that feels like a good transition to move into that. Do you feel like showing off some stuff, Sven?
Sure, yeah. Let's see if I can share my screen, because yesterday we were talking about showing well, open source implementations, and actually, if you look at our SLO SLI infrastructure, it's let me see if I can. Can you see my screen?
We've got it.
Okay. So actually, all the components we use in our, let me see, in our infrastructure to get the SLOs from the developer to our monitoring system and visualizing it is our open source projects. So a couple of these are, of course, well known. Kubernetes, Prometheus for all our metrics collecting. Thanos is for the long-term storage of Prometheus metrics. We use Grafana for the visualization. The service level operator, and I will go into this all a little bit later in the next sheet. The service level operator is an open source project we use, and we have a link, and we will post it in the chat. So we use this for getting the service level as CRDs to Prometheus, and we use Helm for the templating. So this is our, let's say, normal deployment, which our developer teams deploy applications to Kubernetes. So we have their Git repo. We have with Helm, we do the templating. And this usually means that there is some kind of a deployment, service, ingress, and of course, a lot of more things, but I chose those for now. So it's really about, okay, how does my application look like if it runs on Kubernetes? So what we did with SLOs to integrate in this, we put in an SLO dependency. So that's a separate Helm chart. And Helm is pretty great in that way. So you can say in your Helm chart, like, hey, I want to have a dependency on this chart. And this way, developers themselves can use the values file, which they already familiar with because they deploy it that way. Within their values file, they can put in SLOs and SLI definitions. So what we are really a fan of is that developers themselves have control over their alerts, over their SLOs and SLIs. And the way to do it is to bring it as close to their application as possible, and possibly in their realm of knowledge. So that's really within their Git repository. So if a new team wants, let's say, has their application and they want to add an SLO, they can do it within their Git repository. Helm will template that and put a service level CRD on Kubernetes. So this looks like this. So a CRD is a custom resource definition. So it's an object that exists on Kubernetes that can be picked up by operators. So what we saw earlier, that there was like a deployment was specified, and a service and an ingress, but here is also a CRD. So when they deploy the application to a Kubernetes cluster, it will be deployed there. The service level operator will pick this up and will push it to a Prometheus instance. So in every cluster we have, there is a service level operator and a Prometheus instance. And this Prometheus instance will pick up the service level and calculate it with the metrics that is available. So from all these clusters, the metrics will go to one central federated Prometheus. And this is like, if you talk about SLOs, it's always about a longer period. So what we have is a federated Prometheus with a long-term storage on it. So this is a Thanos we use for it. So this means that we can trace back SLOs for at least 2 years. So you can really see the trends from, okay, where were we, where are we going? And then we use Grafana to visualize these SLOs. And that would look like a little bit like this. So on the left side, you can see the SLO, so the objective. You can see that at this moment is specified at 99.95. And you can see that the SLI is at the moment lower than that. It's at 99.77. So you can really see that at this moment, we're not reaching our objective, though that will mean that we are burning a little bit of our error budget. So next to it, you can see a little bit of a history. So this is the last 6 hours. We can see like, hey, what happened in the last 6 hours and at which moments was our service level a little bit degraded. So you can also see that with the error budget burn rate, and on the right side is the error budget you have left. So let's say once this reached 0, that would mean like, hey, there's a problem with your application, and really your reliability is not on level, and you have to work on that to get it up and running again and release, let's say, new features. So it's really about simplifying to see, like in one indication, like what is my my SLO SLI at this moment.
So I love this. It just got me thinking, you know, in the before days when we were all able to meet in person and go have coffee and talk about ideas and you know, wander around offices, we would have dashboards that showed our Grafana information, you know, and told us what's going on. Do you have like a separate monitor now set up so that you're just watching your dashboards, or what do you do now to keep an eye on what's happening inside those?
Well, maybe, of course. Sorry. Yeah, Bart, go ahead.
Well, we shouldn't. I mean, I feel that the moment that you're looking at a graph to see whether things are going wrong, that's not the right approach. These things need to be they need to automatically alert you when things are wrong. So you don't have to go and look at, is my system healthy? You just have to ask, if you don't have, your phone isn't buzzing, that means that your system is up and running. That's also this idea with these SLOs and this error budget is, it's fine if your application is having some difficulty, as long as for any particular period, your system has been considered available according to your SLO. Now, SLOs include this idea of instability at some level. So what Sven has made with this whole SLI and SLO approach and allowing these teams to really control their own metrics, they can then build alerts based off of how much of their error budget they are burning within any particular time. So if you say, okay, I'm burning a very small amount of my error budget right now, we can do a prediction, for example, on that and say, okay, what does that look like within the next 12 hours? Let's say you're only burning like half of your error budget within the next 12 hours. We don't actually need to send an alert. We can actually send you that alert in the morning. I mean, I'm giving an example.
Okay,
But imagine that, you know, if my service, if I'm a DevOps engineer and my service is being unhealthy for, say, 1 in every million requests, I don't want to get a call from that while I'm sleeping. Whereas, you know, if it's more than that, I do want to get a call. So these SLOs and these SLIs and that burn rate allows us to really play with the question of when do we want to be engaged in having to take action. So we don't really use these dashboards other than asking the question, how have we been doing over the past weeks, sort of like an active analysis at a particular point in time.
I love it. Yeah, that's great advice. I think the burn down stuff and showing where you're, you know, it's not that hard to build a trend. You know, you can see what's happened in the past. That's like the only thing we can do. So to see where things are going towards an error budget or whatever, honestly, you know, there's the backstage chat is lighting up because everybody's like, burn the dashboards and get rid of it all because they're a distraction, you know, but they end up being vanity metrics. And honestly, my experience is it's usually leadership that wants them. You know, they're the ones who don't have their hand on the pulse of what's going on, and they're but they would like to know that their business is healthy and that things are okay. So anyway, it's funny to see the reaction to dashboards because they've become such an integral part. But to your point, I believe their value is more in the post mortem or the learning review or whatever happened to say, okay, what happened? How did we get to our error budget? And nobody knew. Like we should have been alerted hours ago that the math shows we're going to exceed our limits. We should have known that.
Yeah. It's for review. It's also for problem solving in the moment. So if I'm getting called at night, I want to have a dashboard that shows very intricate details of my service, so I can make a conclusion as to what's going wrong.
Great advice.
And it's actually funny that you mentioned, Jason, regarding the management wanting to have these to get some kind of insight into how everything is working. I mean, when you're in the middle of a crisis or you have a really big incident on your hands, the thing you want the least is to also have to battle management while you try to recover this. Mm-hmm. So in that sense, it kind of makes sense to create these reports afterwards and give them to management as well, instead of having them hitting F5 on their keyboards, watching when the graphs start trending downwards, because that's really a distraction and something we need to get away from if we want to solve the issue.
Absolutely, yeah. Management, I mean, they're of course involved and want to be involved and helpful, but obviously they're shoulder tapping and is it fixed yet comments are not helping. Or what, it's not just them too. There's other teams that are going to pop in. The sales teams are going to want to know, is this impacting our customers, because they're like calling us. And they have a right to know something. So I think this kind of speaks to the idea of incident management, SRE, and all these things. It's an organization-wide thing, and we just have to be able to communicate what's going on. That's why status pages exist. Say we are aware of a problem, and we have our best people on it, and we will tell you when things are restored, and just have go have some coffee or something, like chill for a bit. So. This is all great advice.
Our working model is we have a dedicated incident commander that's on shift, particularly to handle management and to handle stakeholders. So whenever there's an incident that involves any type of customer impact, they're responsible for then communicating with the sales team and communicating with management team to inform them on an hour-by-hour basis what is happening, what fixes are being deployed, whilst the actual engineers can go in and actually do those fixes without being bothered and having to answer questions. And it really, for us, that's really sort of alleviated and also reduced the mean time to repair for all of our teams.
Yeah, incident commanders are always super helpful.
Awesome. Thanks for all this information. It's really like just absorbing what I can. What's your thoughts on status pages, Bart and Sven? Automatic or manual?
Well, I think automatic would be really nice, but I think it's also really hard, because when is something really impacting a certain amount of people that you want to update the status page, and when is it just a small? So where are the limits within that you want to notify your end users? Yeah.
I think it's always tricky. Automation in general is dangerous. And then when you're talking about communicating out to people, all I know is that my monitoring wasn't always accurate. We would think things were broken and they were fine. We don't know how, but everything was fine. So to sound the alarm that things are broken publicly might not be the best thing. If you're talking internally as a status page, that might be a little safer bet. But I like the idea of still people, got to be involved. Like there's no resiliency is not a thing without the people. You can have all kinds of tools. You can have all kinds of automation and alerting. You can even have, self-healing using AI. It's all still, it needs people. That's where your resiliency comes. And I think to ease the minds of those who are depending on your service, we're not talking about Twitter going down. We're talking about the services out there that people really rely on, even delivery of food. There's people out there, especially these days, who that's a thing that they have come to rely on, is making sure that they can get the resources they need when it's much tougher to go get those resources right now. So having people verify that we have a problem and that we are doing something about it is my stance on status pages. Status pages have to be a thing. I think every service that has an audience or customers who really do rely on it, almost like a utility, like electricity and water, like they've come to rely on your service for something. You owe it to them to let them know when something's wrong and that you're doing something about it. I'm not sure automating that public announcement is the best approach, though.
Yeah, totally agree. Yeah.
How about in case of, for instance, because most of these status pages, they have like traffic lights and things like that to communicate the health of a service. Because I could personally, at least, see some benefits of having that semi-automated, so that you would get it put into a degraded state if your monitoring catches any issues. If nothing else, but to not having your customers be the ones that realize that something is wrong, but signaling that we are actually on top of this. We have monitoring in place that shows us that something is a bit fishy. Not necessarily automating the whole message and doing a public announcement and things like that, but at least signaling that it's something might be wrong here. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Sema. At least letting the end users make them aware. There's nothing worse than finding out your system's broken on Twitter. So at least allow something to say we are aware, or we are investigating something. We don't know if there's a problem yet, but we are aware that there could be something. I think is especially in certain industries, government services, things like that, where people really do. Life and death type things might be on the line here. I think that's a very wise approach. The point of the whole thing, though, is you don't want to conceal or hide the problems from your end users. They know, like if they're trying to use your service, even if they're just trying to log in and it's not working, like they know. So the longer you hold out in telling them that you also know, the worse it is for you. All right. Looks like maybe we got another question here. Carrie, you want to field that one for us?
Yeah, sure. We have a question from Mark Thaker. In my limited experience, SLOs have a tendency to be more technical than functional. Example, we want uptime of 99.99% instead of we allow max 2 incorrect customer shipments per day. Any guidance on moving from technical SLOs to more functional?
Yeah, I have a feeling that it's easier to set up technical SLOs because the metrics are probably there already. So I think if teams really want to move to functional, it's first the first step would be to get all those metrics also into a system, into your monitoring system, and from there I don't think it's too hard to do. So
yeah, it's also the SLOs are focused on your users of a service, right? I mean, the SLI stands for service level indicator. So what is the level of service that you are getting? The question should then always be, what service are you providing, and how do we measure whether we are providing that service or not, or at what standard we are providing that service. So for example, if you have a very technical, so let's say you host DNS, right? Then your service that you host is DNS, so an indicator would just be response times of DNS queries. So that's a very technical thing. But if you offer something like you said, let's say you're a shipping company, how many customers get incorrect shipments a day? That would be something that Sven just said. You need to measure, find some way to measure those things, and then build your SLOs based on that. So it's think about your service as what are you providing, and then use that to guide you towards what metrics you need, and then you can start forming your SLIs and SLOs.
I always love the opportunity to point out the math on an additional 9 in somebody's SLOs. If they want to go from 4 nines to 5 nines or whatever the nines might be, in many cases, we're talking numbers that aren't even possible to achieve. But also, are they really that big of a difference? Like, if you think about the engineering effort to go from 99% available of a service to 4 nines, it's astronomical in some cases. Some teams just can't do it. You're just asking too much. But a CTO, or maybe probably not a CTO, somebody in leadership read in a magazine or on a website somewhere, we need to be at 4 or 5 nines of availability. And I think it's healthy to have goals and to set those standards, but just know that depending on the service that you're building, maybe it doesn't need to be up all the time as close to 100%. Especially in a such a segmented world where we've got all these different services that talk to other services just over APIs. Some of those APIs are only called every once in a while. So maybe their uptime isn't quite as critical as a different service. So I think it's important to point that out too.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
exactly.
think it really helps just to show what it is, what you're trying to calculate, how many nines, let's say, just write it out. What is the impact? What is the amount of requests you miss? If people see that, it's probably, more realizing like, okay, what are we really measuring here?
Totally. I mean, I was just doing, I put this in chat for all of us. I don't know if we want to share it, but there's a tool, uptime.is or IS, that allows you to see the math, and if you're looking at 4 nines for an SLA or an SLO, you're allowing yourselves just under 4.5 minutes of downtime per month. I don't know about you, but most teams aren't even going to be able to page an engineer in 5 minutes. Like, their mean time to page is not that, not that good. So it's important to pay attention to SLOs and SLIs. That should be what drives so much, but set some realistic goals and make sure that you're not just throwing 4 nines onto everything you do. It's impossible, it's unreasonable, and it's unnecessary too.
Yeah, and as you say, I mean, the math goes both ways as well. In that daily downtime of, say, for 3 nines, I'm reading from the uptime site, 1 minute and 26 seconds per day. What would the cost for your operation be to actually be down for that amount of time? Would that really make up for all of the cost you would accrue for actually implementing what you would need for this? Do you really lose that much money that an effort to get those additional nines makes sense for such a short time? Most companies probably not.
Yeah, and you're shooting yourself in the foot, right? Because it's your error budget is so small that you cannot take risk anymore. It's like, because you already have that short amount of minutes, you cannot take any risk to do like new cool things with your service.
Yeah. And also we've got Suze in the background asking some questions on chat, helping produce, and she was asking or pointing out that sometimes it's difficult, moving. We were talking about functional availability and technical, and just getting people to change, how they think about stuff, just like what we're talking about with the 4 nines, 5 nines, whatever. Do any of you have any advice on, when someone does come to you and say, hey, we need to establish 99.9% availability on this service? My answer is, or response is almost always why, but you don't have to be so blunt. I'm wondering if anybody's had those conversations and how those go to really, this is the like changing the mindsets to people. Like, that's the DevOps stuff, is having those. So I'm curious if anybody's got any examples of a conversation like that.
Yeah,
I think it's. Go ahead.
I think we both did. Yeah.
Yeah, think about the user, right? It's I think it's really about sitting together with your business stakeholders, and thinking about what is the service that we are really providing, and what reliability do our customers expect from that. If I'm building a let's take a web shop, because that's the space we're in. if someone goes to the checkout lane and they have to click the checkout button and it fails, what happens? If the answer is it just says something went wrong, please try again, someone can press again, and they're continued, then the reliability of that from a customer perspective is not 100% ideal, but it is perfectly acceptable. Whereas, let's say someone clicks it and then your entire order disappears, that is something that wouldn't be acceptable. So whenever you think about, okay, I'm building an SLO for this particular service that I'm providing, what happens when something goes wrong? What is the acceptable level of error here? And really think about it from the user, not from the technical side. Because you can make arbitrary numbers on the technical side, but it's really about your user.
Yeah. What I see really helps is just put the PO and the developers just in one meeting and talk about it, because they know the team knows what they deliver, the PO knows what business wants, and it really helps even out the expectations.
Yeah, that was going to be my follow-up. Is I totally agree. You know, it's all about what the customer expects and what we're trying to build for them. How do we get that information? You know, as engineers, we don't typically have frontline conversations with our customers. Some of us do, but you know, usually we hear it through a product team or something like that. And is that what's going on with your team? Do you get the product owners involved so that they can be the voice, so that we can collaboratively establish what are our expectations around SLOs?
Definitely, yeah. That I say, like, we if we like onboard a team, and like if they start with SLOs, SLIs, I definitely want a PO there.
And our teams are very focused on particular parts of our product. So we have teams that are dedicated to, say, doing checkout on the website. So then we have a team that works very well together with the business unit that is responsible for the whole checkout process. So they are very much integrated into the whole business side, which you need, else you can't make these decisions, right? The distance becomes too large and the customer becomes an abstract thing.
Awesome. Thank you. Just out of curiosity, let's say I want to get more into SRE. Do I need to get certified? Like, is that like, well, there's all these Kubernetes certifications and like, okay.
Well, I think certification really helps to get into something. So to get into the like the matter, how do you say that? The learning the basics. But I think if you want to, you could also pick up the SRE book and start reading and start trying things out. And yeah, that's what I like to do. Just
do some practical examples.
Yeah, I have always had strong feels about certifications, mostly because I've made it I would say, the bulk of my career without needing one. Now, I know I have a lot of privilege that's provided that for me, but there's been very few times where I think someone who has been certified knows something different than another person when it comes just to the site reliability engineering. Now, if we're talking about specific tooling, getting certified in things like that are specific to Azure or AWS or you know, those types of things, I think that's one thing. But when you're talking about high level concepts, site reliability engineering is really just a mindset and shifting how we approach work to more of a feedback loop, which really again was born out of DevOps. You know, that site reliability book from Google that was just mentioned, it's a monster of a book, you know, but everyone should read it or at least skim through it and take out what makes sense for you, because nobody has Google problems, you know, and that was like back in 2012 or something that they wrote that. So there's going to be certifications for everything, even DevOps, which again, to me is more of like, are you teaching people how to do tools? Are you showing them how to use, you know, Jenkins and set up CI/CD pipelines? Are you showing them how to, you know, use Kubernetes? that's one thing. But if you're just teaching people the principles about site reliability engineering, I'm not sure certifications are a huge advantage. Is my thoughts on that.
Yeah, I would probably even recommend that you try to get hands-on experience. It might be hard to get into the SRE field if you have no prior experience in the field in general, because it requires quite a breadth of knowledge that might be hard to, to really have if you come straight out of the university or whatever might be your case. But doing hands-on labs is definitely a great way to get started. You don't need anything that expensive. You could go with Raspberry Pis and just build a cluster on top of that, and find out some services you like or some software you like, and just get that running in Kubernetes, and make sure to get monitoring and visualization for that. You'll probably learn more, I would say, than going for an SRE certificate, because that's usually tied to some kind of technology or some vendor that wants to, to brand you as an SRE practitioner on their tool or their software. So I would definitely read the book and do hands-on labs.
So speaking of that book, what other resources have others come across that have been useful to you? Or I know, for a long time, any book I would come across, we had a little internal book club, and I would share that book. But there's all kinds of conferences. What's been something that if a new person comes to you today and says, where can I go to get caught up on site reliability engineering? Anybody have any suggestions for that?
Well, I've been to meetups and just presentations by people within that field. So I think that helps, and listening to this, that will probably help. So yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And Google has their SRE site. It's really just a great jumping off point. And just also, I guess, just generally looking at the whole DevOps movement in a broader sense, because SRE comes from this whole DevOps movement, right? Is a way to really get into that. I really like the Accelerate book, for example, much more from a culture shift perspective. And that really sort of does this sort of similar thing. It's not SRE specific, but it's really about like DevOps and mindset and all those kinds of things.
On that same note, I'd definitely recommend the Phoenix Project by Gene Kim. That's probably a good start for getting into the mindset for most. And then you also get some kind of story around it that helps you really understand how those situations could look and what it is you're trying to solve. But also DevOps Directive by a fellow named Sid Palace is a really good web page with a lot of articles and YouTube videos that I definitely recommend for anyone that want to learn more about cloud native technology, SRE, DevOps, things like that.
Yeah, and I put it into chat. I don't know if we can share that with the greater chat group there, but Usenix puts on an annual SRE con, which of course, now is all digital, but one day we'll get to go to those again, and they were amazing. To me, they happen in multiple places around the world. They focus specifically on SRECon, of course, or SRE, but there's a lot of stuff in there that you would find at the old O'Reilly Velocity conferences were also good ones for that. Any DevOps Days event that might come up. I know there's not as many, obviously, in person these days, but those will start to pop up again. They're going to be riddled with SRE content because, again, so much of the SRE playbook is right out of the mind shifting of DevOps. And to some of your point about Phoenix Project, that is a great start for anybody who's just like, this all sounds fascinating, but I'm still a little lost. Gene Kim did a great book and then a follow-up to it also, where continuation of the story, where it really puts things into perspective from the non-technical side of things. And it's a very consumable, easily consumed book by anyone, even if you're not in tech. I think if you've worked in a business, you can, the Unicorn Project is the second one that came. The stories that Gene, puts in there are from multiple characters, and so if you've just been in business in general, even if you're not a developer or engineering at all, you can identify with someone in the story. Most of us are the Brent, I think, in that story, but we can always identify with someone and start to piece together. Most of this is about feedback and a better communication strategy, and taking logical approaches rather than just following your gut. We're data driven now, so I always point to those for sure as books to start with, and then at some point the SRE book, which is free. You can go on and they've got a website version of it too. So those are my picks. And then DevOps Days. Those are always great. I come from the DevOps Days community, so I'm always pitching them wherever I can. And I've been all kinds of them around the world, and everyone is unique and amazing. And so those would be mine.
If I can quickly jump in and also plug an event. If you just can't get enough of SRE meetups, there's another one tomorrow, and it's by our company, Container Solutions. You can join the meetup. We have a meetup page, meetup.com/container-solutions. Or you can go to our WTF website. We are doing a WTF is SRE. So what the F is SRE. I'm not going to swear. But our website is cloud-native-sre.wtf. And you can get all the information on there. That will be on May 20th. So be sure it's a free event. And be sure to sign up. It's a virtual conference by SREs for SREs. And you can listen to folks like Liz Rice, Liz Fong-Jones, Rin Daniels, and Emily Freeman, just to name a few. But it's going to be really great. I'm going to be co-hosting on there as well. So they're fun times. I hope you can join it. And then, if you have time tomorrow to join the meetup, it's like a taster of the SRE, WTF SRE conference.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Sounds great, Carrie. All right, so I think we're just glanced at the time here. We're starting to get close to the end of our allotted time here. But before we go, I wanted one question we had a couple questions we didn't quite get to. We tried to squeeze them in, but with the way things have been for the last year with the pandemic and being on lockdown, I'm curious how each of you feel SRE has changed. Maybe it hasn't, but I'm curious if things feel different for you and either how you approach your work, any of it. So maybe let's start with Sima, and then we can go to Bart and then Sven.
Yeah, sure. Given that we actually at K6 work with load testing and performance testing and things like that, I would dare to say that we've seen an increased interest from all over around these topics now that people are spending more time at home. I think a lot of people are starting to realize exactly how important or what consequences it has whenever the services you depend on go down. So I definitely see an increased interest from across the board, basically. So definitely noticeable.
Yeah, I'm not sure if the whole pandemic. I have noticed over the last year that there has been sort of a more interest in SRE as a thing. It's sort of starting to catch on into corporates. Whenever I look on LinkedIn, I see a lot more mentions of SRE than I did 2 years ago. So there's a lot of things that are happening there. It's sort of just the awareness is really growing, I think, with events like these and all the other events that we're seeing. I think also because the whole SLI and SLO things makes things very quantifiable in a place where you don't have a lot of face-to-face time, where you have sort of these natural exchanges of stuff. You tend to move more toward process, and SRE allows you to formalize some sort of reliability process, and that sort of helps out, I think, especially in working from home. How about you, Sven?
Yeah, about the same. No. I think what I really feel what we are missing is really the knowledge sharing within the team. Well, we're not totally missing it, but it's if I look at our teams, it's quite harder to share the cool things you do within the SRE teams. So it's it takes a lot more effort to say like, hey, we create this cool thing, or maybe we don't see it at all. And that's a shame, because I think a lot of people do really cool things, and I think I really miss that part, that people share those things.
Excellent. That's great. What about you, Carrie? Has this sparked any ideas around how things might have changed for what you're doing?
Yeah, as per usual, there's so much to learn. But yeah, it's very inspirational. I think there's a lot to still get into, but for good reasons. Like, again, it comes down to that: what are we, with the quality that we can provide to users by doing it this way, and also just the less gray hairs and stress in our overall team structure when we work this way.
See all these gray hairs? This is from being on call and then an operations role for most of my career.
Fair enough. I haven't been in there long enough yet. Hopefully with SRE, I won't have to.
There you go.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, this has been a great, great show, we'll say, or a great meetup today. So, we're starting to wrap up here, get to the end of our time today. Just a few kind of housekeeping things as we end. First of all, thank you all for being here. This has been wonderful to get to chat with all of you and hear your advice and your expertise. And thank you to all the folks that joined us in chat. We had some really great questions. We're going to have a recording up shortly, so stay tuned for that if you didn't catch all of that. And thank you to our team that's organizing. Thank you to everybody who's backstage. We got Suze, we got Nick, Floor. Next week, though, we can be sure to tune in for the meetup on chaos engineering. We've got a friend of mine, actually, Quintessence Anks, who's a developer advocate over at PagerDuty. So that should be a really amazing episode or a really amazing meetup.
Yeah. And then on May 12th, the topic is open gaming and open source game dev with M. Laser Walker, cloud advocate at Microsoft, and Mark Mendel, developer advocate for Google Cloud for Games, and founder of the open source multiplayer dedicated game service scaling project, Agones. I hope I pronounced that right. Agones. Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Thanks so much for your time.
All right, and let's see, we can join the meetup tomorrow. I believe this is the one that you were talking about, Carrie, right? The container solutions one, right?
Yes. So just to punt that again, we have the www.cloud-native-sre.wtf site that you can go check out if you're interested in it. And it's a whole WTF is SRE answering all these questions that I have, and I'm sure many have, about what is SRE.
Awesome. Okay, well, with that, we will say goodbye. So until next time, thank you for joining us on Contributing Today, and we will see you later. Bye.
Yeah.